Screen time destroyed my kids' ability to focus. Even though they only got 30 minutes of iPad time on weekdays for educational apps and TV just on weekends. No games, no YouTube, it was all productive stuff. But their brains were still getting hijacked. Here are the boundaries that brought back their attention spans. So when we moved to Dubai, life was just a lot. You know those seasons as a mom where you're just trying to survive? We had boxes everywhere, paperwork that never seemed to end. Everything felt so chaotic. And honestly, screens became our lifesaver. They brought us time when we desperately needed it. But here's what I didn't realize. The cost was adding up slowly. My kids were sleeping worse. They were having bigger reactions to everything. And suddenly they couldn't think of a single thing to do that didn't involve a screen. So today I'm going to share exactly what I saw happening, what the research actually says about this stuff, and the specific things we changed that brought back their focus. There's this one tiny change I made to where we keep art supplies that turned my daughter into this little artist who paints every single day now. And there's a bedtime thing that we started doing that gets my son to sleep in under an hour instead of lying there till 11. I'll show you both. So picture this. It's a regular afternoon, right? My daughter's watching some Disney movie. She's completely absorbed and I'm thinking, this is perfect. She's happy, I'm getting stuff done, everyone's content. Then the credits start rolling and I say, okay darling, movie's over, let's get ready to go out. What happened next? Honestly, it still kind of haunts me. She didn't just whine or try to negotiate like kids normally do. She literally crumpled to the floor like I'd physically hurt her. The screaming was so intense, like neighbors might call the police kind of intense. She was kicking, thrashing around. She was completely inconsolable. When I tried to comfort her, she just pushed me away. Her whole body was just rigid with rage. This wasn't just a normal tantrum, you know. This was withdrawal. Like I'd taken drugs away from someone who was addicted. Standing there watching my normally sweet little girl turn into this stranger, I realized something terrifying. Screens were not just babysitting my kids. They were controlling them. When we first got to Dubai, everything felt temporary. We were living out of suitcases, dealing with visa stuff, trying to figure out schools, just completely overwhelmed by moving a family to a whole new country. So weekends became survival mode. The TV would be on so we could deal with boxes, the iPads would be out so we could make important phone calls without being interrupted. And I kept telling myself it was just until we got settled, just until life went back to normal. But here's the thing about temporary habits. They don't stay temporary. They become your new normal before you even notice that that's happened. So by the time our furniture was all set up and we should have had our act together, the pattern was already set. Screens had become our default answer to everything. If they were bored, screen. Need quiet time? Screen. If we needed the kids occupied, screen. Fast forward to this September. We've been here over a year and I thought we'd had everything under control. My 8-year-old goes back to school after summer holidays and that's when everything started going sideways in ways that I didn't see coming. So his school uses iPads a fair bit, like 2 to 3 hours daily. And I wasn't really worried about it because it's all educational, structured stuff. But then he'd come home and use the iPad for what I considered good things. He'd use Duolingo to learn languages. He'd be making projects on Canva. He was not spending time playing games or watching mindless YouTube videos. He wasn't doing anything that felt like a waste of time. And I actually felt pretty smug about how we handled screen time because my kid wasn't some zoned out kid just watching cartoons. He was learning, he was creating, he was being productive. But when I actually added up the hours, he was spending about 2 to 3 hours on a screen at school every day, and then about 30 minutes to an hour of additional screen time at home. That's almost 4 hours of screen time every day, even though every single minute of it felt productive and justified. And that's when the wheels came off. Bedtimes became a nightmare. We'd put him in his room at 7:30, like always. But at 11 o'clock, I'd still hear him losing it. His brain would be too wired to shut down. And then he'll be up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, already alert, already bouncing off the walls. The kid was getting maybe 5 or 6 hours of broken sleep. But it wasn't just the sleep thing. His emotional reactions went completely off the rails. I'd ask him to put his shoes away and suddenly doors are slamming. I'd say it's time for dinner and he'd explode about how unfair everything is. These were not normal kid moments. They were like volcanic eruptions over absolutely nothing. This kid who used to read for hours straight stopped picking up books entirely. The one who'd spend Sunday afternoons building these elaborate Lego cities couldn't focus on anything for longer than 10 minutes. Everything became boring unless it involved his iPad. And what really got to me was that even though I had all of these parental controls set up on his iPad, even though I'd blocked certain apps and websites, he kept finding ways around them. I'd block an app, he'd figure out the browser version. I'd restrict a website, he'd find some other way to get to the same content. Because these kids are growing up with this stuff, right? They don't just use technology, they think like it. While I'm here playing catch up trying to figure out controls, he's already 3 steps ahead of me. But watching him became heartbreaking. This wasn't the kid that I knew, the one who could disappear into a book so completely that I'd have to call his name 3 times just to get his attention. The one who'd wake up on weekends excited about what he wanted to build. Instead, I had this child who kept asking for his iPad, went to sleep thinking about his iPad, and seemed genuinely incapable of enjoying anything that didn't involve a screen. And that's when I started thinking, maybe all of this educational screen time wasn't as harmless as I'd convinced myself. So I started digging into what actually happens to kids' brains when they're on screens all of the time, even the good educational stuff. And oh my god, it all clicked. As someone who studied child development, I thought I understood how screens affected kids. But when I really dug into what was happening to my son's developing brain, I realized that what I knew was barely scratching the surface. Let's start with sleep, because everything else just builds from there. Any screen, doesn't matter if it's educational or not, messes with kids' natural sleep patterns in ways that affect their entire day. So screens emit this blue light that basically tricks your brain into thinking it's still daytime, which messes with melatonin. That's the hormone that makes you sleepy. For us adults, maybe we stay up a little bit later than usual. But for kids whose sleep systems are still figuring themselves out, it can wreck everything. They've found that just turning off screens an hour before bed helps kids fall asleep faster and sleep way better. But what the research doesn't tell you is what it's actually like living with a chronically sleep-deprived kid. No wonder my son was still wired at 11 o'clock after using his iPad until 7 or 8 at night. His brain was getting mixed messages. The content might have been educational, but the light was telling his system to stay alert, stay engaged, stay awake. But the sleep thing was just the beginning. What really freaked me out was learning how screen time changes the actual structure of developing brains. So they've done brain scans on little kids and found that heavy screen time use actually weakens the connections in areas that handle language, attention, reasoning. And this isn't just temporary stuff. This is literally how their brains develop differently. Here's how I think about it. Your brain basically becomes whatever you do the most. So if a kid is getting hours of this fast-paced digital stimulation every day, their brain gets really good at that. But the slow, focused attention that they need for something like reading a book or building something or working through a problem, that becomes super hard because their brain never developed the inner pathways to do those things. It's like if you only ever trained a muscle to do quick, jerky movements, eventually it would lose the ability to do slow, steady work. That's what's happening with their attention spans. So then I started looking into attention and self-control, basically all of those mental skills that help kids focus on stuff, remember what you told them to do, and not have a complete meltdown when things don't go their way. And study after study keeps finding the exact same pattern. Kids getting more screen time really struggle with impulse control. Their memory gets weaker, and they start showing all of these ADHD type behaviors. They can't switch between activities without drama. They literally cannot focus on anything unless it's immediately exciting or immediately rewarding. And their emotional reactions just go completely off the rails. Suddenly, my son's explosive reactions made total sense. Those 20 times bigger responses to simple requests, his brain just hadn't developed the skills to handle frustration, to handle transitions, because constant screen stimulation had kept his nervous system in this heightened state where everything just felt more intense and more overwhelming. The worst part is that all of these problems just feed each other. Poor sleep leads to bigger emotional reactions. Weaker attention makes school more frustrating. More irritability creates problems with friends and family. So the kid gets trapped in this cycle where their main coping strategy, more screen time, actually makes everything worse. They found that kids getting more than 4 hours of screen time daily have way higher rates of anxiety, depression, and behavioral issues. And that's not just some random connection. There's actually a really clear reason why. All of that screen time pushes out the stuff that keeps kids mentally healthy. Running around, talking face to face with people, playing creatively, getting proper sleep. When screens take over everything, kids basically lose all of their normal ways of handling stress. So they get more reactive, they're less able to bounce back from things, and they start needing constant external stimulation just to feel normal. Wait till you hear the research on little kids. They followed babies into their teen years and found that too much screen time in those first few years basically sets kids up for weaker self-control and attention problems that will stick around for years. Look, I'm not anti-technology at all. It's just about timing. Those crucial brain pathways for focus, for emotional control, for impulse control, they're developing like crazy in early childhood. Whatever kids experience during those critical windows literally shapes how well they'll be able to learn and regulate themselves down the road. Even those educational apps that we feel good about, if little kids are using them too much during these sensitive periods, it can actually mess with developing these super important skills. Young brains need variety, they need challenge, they need things to gradually get more complex, not get the same predictable reward pattern that digital stuff gives them. Here's what finally convinced me we needed to change course. Even the highest quality educational content still floods kids with blue light, with overstimulation. And the brain doesn't care whether screen time is good or bad when it comes to sleep disruption and attention problems. Those Duolingo sessions and Canva projects that my son was working on that felt so productive, they were still bombarding his developing visual system with artificial light and rapid fire stimulation. His brain was getting the message to stay alert, to stay engaged, when what he actually needed was to wind down and process his day. So if you're seeing bedtime battles, explosive reactions over tiny things, and a kid who literally cannot think of anything fun to do without a screen, even when their screen time feels educational and worthwhile, you are not losing your mind. The answer isn't becoming anti-technology, it's about becoming intentional with it. Once I understood what was happening in my kids' brains, I knew that we had to make some changes. But I also knew that dramatic overhauls never stick in real life. So I focused on a few key things that would have the biggest impact on getting their attention and their emotional regulation back on track. The first change was the hardest, but the most game-changing. No iPad at home on school days. Full stop. There was no gradual reduction or earning screen time through good behavior. It was just a clear boundary. My son was already getting 2 to 3 hours at school every day. Adding more at home was just pushing his developing brain past what it could handle. Some weekends even became completely screen-free. If we were out at the beach, having friends over, or exploring Dubai, there just wasn't room for digital entertainment. Other weekends we might watch a family movie, but that was intentional, together time. It was not solo screen consumption, and it was definitely not a personal screen. The first week was brutal, I'll be honest. Constant complaining, trying to negotiate with me, telling me I was literally the worst mother in the world. But around day 10, something weird happened. He just stopped asking. Not because he'd forgotten about it, but because his brain had started getting used to a completely different routine. By week 3, the difference was night and day. He'd actually fall asleep within an hour instead of tossing around until 11. He'd sleep through till a normal time instead of being up and bouncing off the walls at 4:30 in the morning. And those crazy over-the-top reactions, they went back to just being regular kid drama. But what really made me smile was watching him fall back in love with books again. The kid who hadn't touched a book for fun in months just started to pick them up again. And it wasn't because I was pushing him or forcing him or bribing him, but it's because his brain finally had room for that slow, quiet kind of focus again. The second thing I did was to totally reorganize our space to actually encourage the stuff that I wanted to see more of. I know it sounds ridiculously simple, but it completely changed how my kids interacted and what they did at home. So I started with their books, which were honestly a disaster. All of the kids' books were just thrown together on this one overcrowded shelf. Picture books mixed in with chapter books, my daughter's little readers buried somewhere under my son's huge novels. It looked so chaotic and overwhelming that they never even bothered looking. So I split them up. My 5-year-old got her own little shelf with books at her level that she could actually see, and my 8-year-old got his own section with all of his chapter books sorted by series. The difference was instant. Instead of walking past this messy, intimidating pile of books, they each had their own neat little collection that actually looked appealing. My daughter started grabbing books throughout the day and even trying to sound out some of the words that she would see on them. And my son went back to picking up books just for fun, something that I hadn't seen in a long time. But the most dramatic change came from one simple switch in our living room. So my daughter has always loved art, right? But all of her supplies were stored in her bedroom. But every time she wanted to paint or draw, she had to gather everything, carry it to the living room where she preferred to work, and then remember to clean up and put it all back. What seems like a tiny inconvenience was actually this huge barrier, because there's this gap between I want to create something and actually creating was so much that it discouraged her most of the time. So I made this radical decision. I moved some of her toys that were in the living room to the bedroom, and I set up a proper art station right in our living room. Paints, brushes, paper, colored pencils, everything that she needed was right there. It was organized, but it was accessible, and it was exactly where she naturally wanted to create. It's still tucked away in a cupboard, so I still get my adult space. But the result of doing that has been that she has painted every single day since I made this change. Every single day. And it's not me prompting her or setting up these elaborate painting activities, but it's just whenever inspiration hits, there are zero obstacles. She's now experimenting with mixing colors, trying techniques like wet on wet that I never really taught her, and she's slowly developing her own unique style. The kid who used to ask for screen time when she was bored now actually automatically reaches for a paintbrush. Kids are naturally wired to want to create, explore, engage with the physical world. But if we make those experiences harder to access than screens, we're actually guiding them towards those screens. Connection is a basic human need, right? Especially for kids. So I made one screen-free activity together non-negotiable every single day. I don't set up any Pinterest-worthy projects. It's just 10 to 20 minutes of us doing something together and just focusing on it with no screens. With my daughter, this usually looks like painting or doodling side by side. It's not me teaching, it's not me directing her. We're just both of us creating our own things while we chat. Sometimes we do the same thing, sometimes we do something different. And she tells me about her day, her ideas, whatever is on her mind. With my son, it might be a quick card game, doing a puzzle together, or just sitting together while he reads me something from his current book. These are not grand gestures or anything Instagram worthy, but they're just these simple moments of us being present together without any digital distractions that are competing for our attention. But the impact was way bigger than the effort involved. Kids who feel genuinely connected to their parents are way less likely to seek stimulation from screens. When they know that they have dedicated time for real interaction, then they're more content just playing independently for the rest of the day because they look forward to that time every day. Living in this part of the world makes kids' physical activity a little bit tricky. Because of the heat, outdoor play is basically limited to early mornings, late evenings, and the few cooler months. So without planning, it's really easy for kids to become couch potatoes. I really resisted scheduling activities because I thought kids needed more free time, more chances to be bored and just figure things out on their own. And I still think that's important. But I realized that if the choice was between structured physical activities and passive screen time, I'd pick movement every single time. We signed both kids up for sports 2 to 3 days a week after school. It's not every day. They still have time for free play and to rest, but it's enough to ensure that their bodies are getting the physical output that they need in order for their brains to function healthily. The science is really clear on this. Physical movement supports attention, emotional regulation, sleep quality. Kids who move regularly have better focus, less anxiety, they have more stable moods. More after-school classes means more logistical planning for me, but within weeks of this new rhythm, both children were more emotionally balanced because that restless energy that used to come out as irritability and fidgeting now had a productive outlet. They were tired out in a good way at bedtime, and so sleep came more naturally. Kids learn so much more from what we do than what we say, especially when it comes to technology. And I realized that my own device habits were sending them mixed signals about when and how screens should fit into our lives. So I started being more intentional about putting my phone away during our time together. I didn't make a big show about it, just I would set it aside and be fully present for our conversations, for our meals, for activities. And I also began talking openly with my kids about how different choices affect our brains and our bodies. We discussed how movement gives us energy, how certain foods help us think clearly, how screens can be useful tools, yes, but they can also make it harder for us to sleep and focus if we use them too much. This wasn't about making technology seem scary to them or forbidden, but it was about helping them develop awareness of how their choices affected how they feel and function. When they saw me choosing a walk over doom scrolling on my phone or picking up a book instead of turning on Netflix, they subconsciously absorbed these patterns as normal and something to look forward to. The other thing that made a huge difference was bringing back reading before bedtime and making it totally non-negotiable. This isn't some elaborate routine, but it hit multiple things at once. It helped them wind down, it got their brains used to focusing on non-screen stuff again, and it gave us some proper one-on-one time. So with my 8-year-old, it's pretty straightforward. He gets 20 to 30 minutes of reading by himself before the lights go out. There's no bargaining. He doesn't ask, can I just finish this first? He just goes in, reads a book, and gives his brain some time to chill out. My daughter, on the other hand, is younger, so she needs a bit more structure. So we started with her reading one book to me, something that she can actually handle, that makes her feel capable, that's at her reading level. And then I read one to her that's maybe a little bit harder. And this completely turned things around for my daughter, honestly. She'd gotten into this headspace where she had convinced herself that she couldn't read, and she would get all frustrated when words were tricky. But having this daily no pressure time in a cozy spot gradually broke down that mental barrier that she had built up. Now I catch her grabbing books during the day, trying to sound out the words on cereal boxes, getting curious about words instead of them stressing her out. That confidence from our daily bedtime routine has spilled into everything else, and she's learning better, she's more confident, she's happy. One of the hardest parts, though, about setting all of these boundaries was dealing with all of the social pressure. My son would come home and say, but so-and-so's mom lets him watch YouTube during play dates, or everyone else gets their iPad after school, why can't I? Or everybody's meeting on this app, we have to get together, otherwise I'll be left out. I was so tired of feeling like the mean mom, so I decided to actually reach out to the parents of my son's closest friends. I figured I'd either find out if I was really being too strict, or maybe discover that I wasn't alone in this struggle. Turns out every single family was dealing with the exact same stuff. The kids had been playing us against each other this whole time, telling each parent that the others were way more relaxed about screen time, when really we were all secretly struggling with the same battles at home. Once we actually started talking about it honestly, we realized we could help each other out. We agreed that playdates would be screen-free unless we specifically planned it as a movie afternoon and everybody else was on board beforehand. This was honestly brilliant because it stopped all of that constant negotiating and comparing. The kids couldn't pit us against each other anymore because we were all on the same page. Having that parent backup seriously made everything so much easier because instead of feeling like I was the only strict one ruining everybody's fun, I felt like part of a team of parents who were all trying to do what's best for our kids together, even when it's not the most convenient thing to do. Look, this didn't happen overnight, but within about a month, our house just felt different. Not like we'd suddenly become this perfect family. Kids are still kids and they still have their moments, But everything was calmer, it was more creative, we feel more connected. Now I see my kids actually choosing to pick up books instead of complaining that they're bored. My daughter's trying all of these painting techniques that I never showed her. She's just figuring stuff out on her own. And my son's back to building these elaborate structures and writing comics and getting totally lost in chapter books the way he only used to get absorbed in screens. And I love that they're sleeping better now. They're not losing their minds over every little thing, and they're actually curious about the world around them instead of just being restless all of the time. Try these strategies with your kids and let me know which one worked best. Looking back on all of this, I realized the biggest change wasn't even in my kids. It was in me understanding what they actually needed. I didn't turn into some crazy anti-screen person. I just care about my kids being able to focus, connect with other people, and actually just be a kid. I learned that setting boundaries isn't restrictive, it's actually giving my kids the space back to regain their creativity and their focus. All of these things, organizing our space, sticking to routines, being more intentional with the time we spend together, it's not about being perfect. It's about setting things up so that my kids can pay attention, be more emotionally balanced, and actually engage with the world around them. Watching them get back to playing, creating, being able to concentrate reminded me why this matters so much. Helping our kids learn to focus properly isn't optional anymore. It's absolutely essential. If any of this sounds familiar, bedtime chaos, over-the-top reactions, hearing "I'm bored" 50 times, you really don't need to overhaul your whole life to see changes. Just pick one thing and stick with it. Maybe it's no screens after dinner, or maybe it's organizing the books so the kids can actually access them, or moving art supplies to where they actually get used. Even just starting a simple bedtime routine can make a difference. What I didn't expect was how much better my kids got at focusing on things once their brains weren't constantly overstimulated. I even noticed it in how they were doing their daily Kumon work. Way more concentration, less fidgeting, and actually enjoying the challenge. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait, you're a Montessori mom who does Kumon? Aren't those like complete opposites? That's exactly what I thought too, until I realized that they share way more principles than I could have ever imagined. I'm going to show you how Kumon can actually align with Montessori values in my next video, and the 5 core principles that completely changed the way I think about structured learning. If you've ever wondered if you can honor your child's development while still building solid academic skills, this might surprise you.